This is Software Engineering Radio, the podcast for professional developers on the web at se-radio.net. SE Radio is brought to you by the IEEE Computer Society and by IEEE Software Magazine. Online at computer.org/software.
Hello and welcome to Software Engineering Radio. My name is Sriram Panyam. I'm your host. Today we have Benjamin Brial, CEO and founder of Cycloid, a DevOps platform focused on simplifying and accelerating cloud adoption. Prior to founding Cycloid, Ben led sales efforts at Innovance as their first employee before the company was acquired by Red Hat. There he held the role of EMEA Cloud Business Dev, focusing on emerging products like OpenStack and OpenShift. Benjamin, welcome to Software Engineering Radio.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you for the invitation. Always a pleasure to discuss.
Yes. Benjamin, I'm excited to talk to you about internal dev platforms and internal dev portals. Tell us more. What is that?
Let's start with the problems. The problems are quite simple, right? DevOps is struggling to scale, right? We are living definitely in a multi-cloud environment, so managing on-premises, public cloud, private cloud is always a challenge, right? And there is also a lot of cloud wasted, right? An average of 35 to 45% according to major analysts, right? So based on these problems, the goal is to build a portal and a platform between the DevOps on one side and the developer on the other side. So the goal is to give access to tools, cloud and automation to end users that are not DevOps and cloud experts, right?
And how do you see this problem? Well, first of all, diving more into the problem itself, at different stages of a company's lifecycle or just size, how do you see this problem manifest itself? In what ways?
What we see in terms of IT transformation, people are starting to build some platform engineering team, right? Coming from the DevOps to platform engineering, we see that GitOps approach is necessary but not enough, right? Generally on IT transformation, they are moving from traditional way to managing infrastructures with on-premises virtualization. And then they start to move to a more DevOps like GitOps approach. But we see that there is some problem of scalability when it comes to DevOps. And there is also some problematic of how do you make sure that your DevOps automation is scaled, right? Is adopted by end users that are not DevOps and cloud experts. So in terms of, I would say, adoption, there is this need of at which stage you are. It could be IT transformation, then it's important to set the stage, right, to have the right automation. But it could be also you have developed your own portal and you are thinking, okay, I need to focus on the automation and listening my developers to how do I bring them some value and less focusing on the portal itself rather than the automation and the tools that you are embedded natively inside it, right?
You mentioned scalability, right? Like, when do you start seeing it? Let's say a startup with 3 people. They're not going to see this. They're going to be on a very GitHub-focused flow. But as a scale, where and how do you start seeing these pain points?
Yeah, when you start to hire more and more developers, that you're losing some efficiency when it comes to scaffolding, some Git repository, that you start to have more and more developer tools that you need to use, and that you see that with your couple of, I would say, 1, 2, 3 DevOps guy that start to struggle to address the need of developers, then it starts to make sense. Of course, when you're, I would say, a small startup, you want to figure out how you provide some value with your platform, right? With your software, and you can handle it with a couple of DevOps, right? But then, more you scale, doesn't matter if you're a scale-up or an enterprise, there is this need to, on both sides, how do you create some governance within the DevOps team? We have seen within my previous company that starting, at 15 DevOps, we had different way to do DevOps. So the kind of how do you define what is DevOps, what is automation is key. And then comes the topic about IDP, portal, and platform. And more you have some developers in front of it, more you're thinking about, okay, how can I give them access to tools, cloud, and automation without being behind all the tickets, right? And what we saw also with our experience is that there is this monitoring ticket, right? If the automation that you have created start to bring more tickets than it's solving, then Then comes maybe the question about how can I give it access to it, right? Because, yeah, let's be honest, when you're 20 to 50, you can manage it, right? Couple of 10, 20 developers, couple of DevOps, 1, 2, 3, it's manageable, right? You can handle it. But then when you start to really scale or you want to address at the enterprise layer, then you need to figure out how you give access to tools, cloud, and automation, right?
It's interesting you mentioned the automation that you create to fix bugs, creating more bugs, right? So there's two examples I'd love to kind of get from you. One is, what is a good example of an automation that is used by teams in an ad hoc way to fix bugs? And what are some common resultant bugs that come up because of this?
Yeah, we were kind of a huge adopter of Terraform, infrastructure as code. And we see that we created some blueprint, and then comes the question about how do we make the evolution of Terraform and to maintain the day-to-day operation of Terraform, right? So yeah, we will go later, as a DevOps, we'll figure out, right? And then we are waiting for the breaking change. So you spend a lot of time on it, and then you can't upgrade all the project in the same thing. So one example is just Terraform, or what we have lived also with customers is, where do you set the border between what does Terraform, what does Ansible, what does your Kubernetes platform, and where do you want to invest more to make sure that at the end you don't create legacy on automation, right? And we have lived this, that we started with Terraform, but we wanted to also implement the configuration management. And finally, we see that it's exactly the same topic with CI/CD. We started with Jenkins, and then we bring Argo CD, but we, in the same time, implemented some GitHub Actions because it was kind of, and let's even not put the AI topic on the top of all of this, right? So at some point, more there is some time which is passing, more there is this need of taking care about the automation and how do you maintain all these stack templating, right? And how do you make sure that you have the engine behind that help you to don't maintain the same stack over and over and over just because there is new people that are deploying the stack that you have created. Doesn't matter if it goes through Portal or if it goes through your GitOps approach right here, the repo, and just use it, right? There is this problematic about, I don't want to manage 20,000 times the same repository, right?
Or the same kind of repositories. And typically with any development team, at least as they grow, they don't start to think of their platforms as their first go-to choice. They're cobbling things together. They just put things together, see what works, see what doesn't work. They build all these scripts, right? And what are the metrics, I guess, that become evident for a team to pause back and say, hey, what we're doing ad hoc way isn't working. We need to consider some kind of portalization, I guess. What would you recommend that is? What would you say that is?
Yeah, it's a good question. Depends about who you are. If you are the DevOps team or if you are the dev team, I would say so. I would bring the answer to both of them. Right?
Let's go even earlier. I mean, as a startup or as any entity is growing, they may not even know which side of the divide they're on, right?
I mean, first of all, there is the topic about scorecard and how do you evaluate, right? If you start to feel that, okay, we don't really monitor what we are doing, we start to see that we are losing sometimes when it's onboarding new developers, or, what is the stacks that we are using, or what is the automation behind, and all these kind of typical question where the mouse-to-mouse approach doesn't work anymore, because we know that at human being, when you pass 50 to 100 people, you can't know everybody, right? So there is this kind of fluctuation between 50 to 150, where at human size, you can't know anymore all the people. So you can't say, yeah, just use this and that, and it will work, right? So I think there is this, when I speak about teams, there is this kind of number of people, first of all, and also the number of projects that you have, right? If it's a one big monolithic or one project, then it's kind of easy if it's not too microservice approach, right? But when you start to see the problem of microservice, that you don't know who is doing what, who is managing what, and who is owner of which microservice and all this stuff, then this is the right moment. So I would say those three metrics, which is the number of people that you have, the number of lack of, that you are feeling that there is a need of scorecard and to start to track what happened, right? And the fact that you're starting to ask yourself about who is doing what, which automation, which repository, and all this stuff. then I think it's the right moment to consider what is your strategy, right, when it comes to IDP.
Yeah. And we talked about people, we talked about projects, and there's clearly process that could be in place, both good, bad, ugly. And how do you see like existing process kind of fitting in there? And how do you see the process being both a signal and a call for help?
I mean, we do speak a lot about DevOps and developers, but we don't enough speaking about solution architects and that are working to design the processes to make sure that it is as smooth as possible, especially for organizations that have center of excellences that are trying to think about, okay, which kind of processes should I implement? Because it's not, I have to, I want to, but because I have to, right? If you are a regulated company, if you are a public institution company, there is multiple companies that are being forced to act in a certain way, right? So this is pretty important to make sure that the solution architect, even the security are embedded in the reflection about which processes that I want to take care about all the parties that are integrated, especially when it's come also to multi-cloud. So for example, major organization, we know that everybody have a word to say. The network, the security, the architecture team, the software team, and the DevOps team, right? And there is this need to make sure that you have some people, doesn't matter if you go through GitOps approach or if you go through a portal, that are working to make them glue between all those people, right? Even if we know that there is a lot of problematics around the politics, around budget, that people don't want to lose their field. But you can't just, okay, we don't care about it. This is one of the main problem about adoption of the IDP world that are coming from more the dev side. They were thinking, okay, we'll build an IDP and then it will be adopted by everyone. No. You won't force the security. You won't force the DevOps. You won't force the infrastructures that taking care about making it running, right? And this is one of the major issues, right? We come from dev world and say, let's go, it will work, right? And they have to work together, right? I mean, at least it is my belief, right?
Actually, I mean, I was going to jump into some of the architectural components, but I'm really curious about the adoption challenges, right? The process, the politics, the people, right? So you have this entity that is growing to a size where it's realizing that, look, they're doing a bunch of things and it's kind of not working because their velocity metrics are going down, their toil is going up, and they need something is needed, right? So at this point in time, they either reach out to somebody like yourself or you find them through some channel. What happens then?
I think this problem of adoption is not always a question of techniques, right? It could be also a question of, this is my project, I want to make it work at any cost, right? I like to play with new open source approach, right? And we have the same problem internally. We love to develop everything by our own because we are a tech company, right? And doesn't matter if you're US or European companies, when you ask a developer, we have this problem, what do we do? They will always say, let's develop it, right? It's a fun project, right? And then there is this kind of affect that you have with your project because you spend so many effort. You know, this theory that when you have put so many effort to do this, you don't want to let it down because you're almost there, right? Which is kind of one tricky thing that I see, which can be complicated to handle, which is kind of psychological things, right? Another things when it comes to adoption is that sometimes there is this border of convictions. Let's say, I will give you some few examples. We are GitOps-based organization, so everything will go through GitOps. Every developers will go through GitOps because we will train them to become DevOps, right? When you have these such convictions, right, it's complicated to go on. When you don't want to see something, you will find always excuses to don't want to see something. One example. The other example you can have is that, okay, we'll build a center of excellence. I spent 2 years to have this center of excellence and my 20 people budget to make this center of excellence. And we will build for them the automation and it will be adopted, right? It is the first steps. But as a human being, if you want that something is adopted by someone, you can't say only, okay, use what I've done. You need to help him adopt and use and contribute, right, to improve what you have done. And this is a second step, which could be really complicated because it is, how do I build the second stage, right? For example, I give you a factual example. I build a stack or I build a service catalog where I have my landing zone. and have the automation on the top of it, right? You have your repository, it's scaffolding everything on your Git, right? So use it, right? Okay, you can use it, but let's say as a developer, I want to change it for my business unit because how do I make this change about everything that you have gave me without breaking everything, right? So this is some question that is always difficult to handle when you have spent so much time to build your service catalog. And then, for example, another example is you build some forms, right? Doesn't matter if you do it yourself or if you do it through a portal, you build some forms and then you end up with 1,000 forms. How do you manage the day-to-day operation, right? How do you make sure that they don't redevelop something that have been already developed, right? Because we see on big organization, we have this capability to redo and redo and redo all the time the same things, modulo the 5-10%, custom. So one of the big challenge I would say when it comes to adoption is to make sure that we don't only think for ourselves, but we also think for others and how do you make sure that they can contribute to what you have done. And not only here I expose you what you've done, doesn't matter your strategy, API first, backend first, you don't need a front end, or finally you need a front end, or you do it yourself, right? It's how do you make sure that it's not your project, it's a project that you will be part of, right? Which is the success of open source, right? Like, it's not your project, it's something that you can contribute and then you scale, right? It's my belief, right?
It's interesting you mentioned center of excellence because in a lot of the companies, a center of excellence ends up becoming this single point from which ideas kind of emerge or ideas are meant to emerge, right? And typically you might have the case where they're addressing a certain problem, but as the problem space moves within the company, the 80%, 90% case that they are charged with solving might no longer be the problem statement, right? And the case you mentioned where you have 1,000 forms coming up or 1,000 different implementations coming up, it's almost like a reaction to what was before, but what is not being addressed today, right? So I guess that's where it sounds like IDPs come in with a set of recommendations on how these processes can be standardized and measured. So now that a entity, small, big, medium, large, has decided that they need something, right? And they reach out to somebody who's experienced in building IDPs. So what next? Like, what does a implementation look like for them? They know they want it. They don't know what it is. What do they do?
I mean, we still have some customers which are working, I would say, through a traditional VMware approach or whatever, virtualization with all the automation, which is not really based on open source, that's saying, okay, let's do some IDP or whatever. And I always explain them, there is no tools that exist that will do the tricks for you if you don't have people behind, right? It doesn't work. So you need to invest on DevOps, platform team, whatever you call it, that has both the capability to leverage your automation, create your automation, but also evangelize, right? Because what you don't want on this role is someone which is focusing only on the tech aspect, but don't work with your end users to have a recurring loop of we are working as a team, I'm here to serve you, and I'm here to make you something that at some point makes sense, right?
On that quickly, what does that anti-pattern look like in real life in one of your implementations?
Yeah, I mean, the anti-pattern is hiring some huge tech expert that don't want to speak to anyone out of this code, right? And then it ends up doing some really nice tech things, but can maybe miss the point about what is your need, right? Explain me, right? And what I've seen through my career is that the best tech guy are not the best, generally not the best speaker guy, right? The guy that you want to discuss with, that will come to speak to you, to help me understand what you need and how you use it. And I will explain you how you should use it and how you can contribute. So it's always, you need to have people that does the automation and you need to have people that explain it and work with the team, right? And it's always complicated to find everybody wants the sheep that does everything, right? But there is no 50 sheep, right? You can have maybe one or two, right, that are top guys, but at some point, evangelization is not something that you should avoid or you think because you're developing something which is completely beauty, doesn't matter if you buy it or if you build it, that it will be adopted by yourself, right? It has to invest on people and product. It's not only a product topic, right?
Right. But if you look at the architecture of a typical IDP, when an enterprise decides to take one, what would you recommend is the ideal architecture? Or are there stages of evolution that you would recommend? Like, where does that fall in? If you're designing one from scratch today, how would you go about this?
I mean, you should be completely agnostic from your cloud infrastructures. So it doesn't matter if it's on-prem, public cloud, Kubernetes, or whatever. But what you're designing should be completely agnostic for it, right? You should be thinking it's only this or that, right? Because what could be true today can be wrong tomorrow, right? Let's say you're a startup, you're only on a cloud provider, and then you acquire another company, he's on another cloud provider, then okay. Or you are a major organization, you say, yeah, today we only do this cloud plus the on-prem, and then you have a new boss and say, now it's not this one, right? It's another cloud provider, right? So first, agnosticity of the cloud. Second, open source automation, right? You don't want to have your automation, which is linked to a vendor or a constructor of hardware, because by definition, if they are investing on a software which is linked to your low layer, you can make sure that they won't work to be as agnostic as possible. They will invest on definitely their architecture. And then there is this topic of portal and platform, where at some point it should be also completely agnostic from the automation. And then there is this strategy of build it versus buy it. You should ask yourself the important question, okay? If I build it when it's open source, is it really open source? Is it sovereign? Does it respect the open source strategy, meaning multiple contributor from enterprise market behind, right? Because individual contributor is great, right? But it doesn't scale an enterprise open source project, right? You need to have strong partners and vendors that are supporting this. Or if you buy it, you should find something that is enough flexible to not lock you, because like a full product, which is our concern, right, is not something that you want to be capable to customize what you have bought, right? So this is the kind of typical architecture, right, that you can embed. And then there is this open question about where do you set the border between portal and platform? If you're coming from the cloud management world to the IDP world, could you find something that make the glue? Because otherwise you will have two different software that will have to communicate, and then you can create some more automation that is complex to handle and all this stuff. So there is no tools that does everything, right? Or no software that does everything.
That's a really good segue. I mean, where do you draw the line between portal versus platform, and how would I, as a customer, know the difference?
What I would say is that portal is the dev world and platform is the DevOps world, right? But as an end user, you don't want to take care about all the automation behind, and you want to make sure that just like when you are using something, it respects best practices at organization layer. And what I see is that this is our play. I'm not here to talk too much about Cycloid, but I never understood how you can separate the both of them, right? Because a portal, we already have it. It's called Firefox, right? You can have all your...
It's the UI and the API gap, right?
Yeah. Things need to communicate each other. Self-service portal can't be separated to the orchestration layer. Otherwise, again, you create some friction between the portal and the platform, which is normal. It's a market overview, let's be honest. US way of designing software are quite simple. They are saying, we are coming from the dev world, we'll build the developer tools interface, and then we will force DevOps. What we have seen so far is that you don't force DevOps, you don't force infrastructures. And on the infrastructures layer, you had the cloud management platform world that is kind of dead with all the DevOps and multi-cloud world that raised, right? So I think you should figure out how you can build a bridge between this IDP and CMP, and doesn't matter if you buy it or build it, finding something that don't create more work that you want to solve, right? And let's not even speak about AI on the top of it, right?
I don't think you're going to have any talk or chat or podcast without AI at some point in time. Bonus points if you do. But going back to the divide between portal and platform and UI and API, and so how would you describe the technical components of this architecture that can unify them? You mentioned principles like being cloud agnostic, being open source friendly, being enabling customizability. But what about a good IDP architecture can actually enable that? Like what would be the components, like key components?
So in terms of software, first, there is this service catalog, right? Building blocks that you need to build, right? Behind it, you need to have an engine that is capable to version everything that you have done, the versioning aspect. Otherwise, you will have to maintain multiple stacks which are kind of the same. Then you need to have the platform orchestration, which is how do you orchestrate and how to make sure that you have a coherency between all the tools that you're using. Then you have, I would believe, an asset inventory approach, which is how do you make sure that you give a 360 visibility about your environment. Doesn't matter if it's on-prem, public cloud, and all this stuff. Then there is this topic, which I believe that we need to be tackled, is the FinOps and GreenOps module. At some point, you want to evangelize your developer and anyone which are not DevOps and cloud expert, even the DevOps, to your cloud cost impact and your carbon impact, right? Because in the next couple of years, you will have some trade-off about, you can't deploy here because you didn't pay enough, right? So you have to decide where you are capable to deploy, especially with the rise of AI that are really high consuming in terms of resources. And then there is this scaffolding approach, right? Where you need to make sure that the interaction between what you are doing and everything that you have on your Git repository respects some structure. Otherwise, anyone that are deploying a new project will face some difficulties when it comes to find a new project or find a project that is already exists. So all this aspect of scaffolding. And to finish, I'm a strong believer about AI as an assistant, not as a do-it-for-you, right? And as an assistant to make sure that when others are using what you are doing, you have a capable to have a feedback loop that is capable to make sure that it's respecting best practices, it's respecting your API. Of course, the documentation that should be linked to it, documentation, logs, and to finish, to be capable for anyone to contribute to what you have done is to give them the aspect of plugin system, right? Where you should be capable to give them the capability to create some plugins in a simple way that is manageable, right? Because as a platform team, you will never be able to address 100% of the use case, right? It will never exist, right? You can try as hard as you want. It's not possible because you will have always someone or a business unit that will tell you, yeah, it's lovely what you have done, but I want this and that, right? So you need to build an engine that is capable to handle this capability to integrate some custom needs that you will never be capable to handle, right? And to finish, the last piece on the top of it is the capability to measure what you have done and to collaborate on it, to be capable to have some clear feedback loop within what you are doing. You know, I'm not speaking only about a link to your, Slack or whatever you are using in terms of instant messenger. I mean, a system that is capable to work as a roadmap system within your product to make sure that you give the capability to also help you improve what you have done, right? And to communicate on it, to interact, to save some time for both the dev and the DevOps when you want to help them working together.
The analogy I could think of is it is a lot easier to launch rockets from space than it is from Earth, right? So you want to get your rockets to space as quickly and fast and cheaply as possible, right? And a lot of this integration is kind of that, because once they have an IDP in place, they get all the benefits. But how do you get them there? How do you get these customers kind of onboarding onto your IDP, or even forming things in a very left shifted way so they can start using it? So again, if you think about customers, building their own service, using gRPC or REST or whatnot, right, in custom frameworks, how do you make integrations easy for them so no matter where they are, you can meet them there? Like, what can you do?
Use simple things that are completely natively automated. You can't ask them to understand all your ecosystem. It has to be simple. It has to be one good use case is being capable to also integrate in the vibe coding approach, where you should be able to test and try and fail fast before you want to invest heavily on a plugin, or, you need to be capable to be agnostic from any languages. Because if you force the language, you can make sure that the guys say, oh, no, I want to use this and not that because we have the expertise and blah, blah, blah. So this, plus the fact that you need to have people that evangelize, that explain, that go to see the team, that go to see the members, that, okay, we have done that, you can do this. You can't request everything from the platform that you're building. You need to have people that are willing and want to spend some time with people that are not DevOps and cloud experts. So it's a multi-factor approach to help sure that your platform that you're building is also serving the interest of someone which are clearly not DevOps and cloud expert. And it is really complex because, let's be honest, like developers like to develop on their languages, and it's also a question of habit, a question of knowledge, and question of convictions. I'm a pro React, or I'm a pro Vue, or I'm a pro Go, or I am pro C++. You can't compete against that. You need to adapt to, okay, if you want to do that, this is the schema that you have to respect. I will help you make sure that you can do this and that and keep your things. And of course, if you develop something that at the end help the end user adopt faster and are capable to create some plugin in more easiest way, better it is. I'm a strong believer that the best UI experience is the UI where you don't have to explain everything to the end customers, to the end user, and that it's obvious that, okay, I can do this in a simple way, which is the beauty of UI and UX, and which is the complex things, because developing something which is simple and flexible, this is the most complicated things. And this is where we see, I would say, the lack of capability of AI that are not designed and thought to make something simple. They're working on patterns, and we see that the way of how it is created so far, we can't achieve to have this beauty of a strong UX UI approach with people that thought about, okay, the simple is the better, the smoother, right? And I mean, when people tell me, AI will replace UI, I say we are not living in the same world, right?
I mean, if you ask me, the best UI is CLI.
So there is still a lot of work to do, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned schema registry, right? Schema registry or schemas, and again, meeting where they are. So with your service catalog approach and having a schema registry, like how does the customer kind of get to a point where they are ready to be part of the service catalog? Like what do they have to overcome? Like what gravitational forces do they have to overcome to get to space?
As an end user or as a DevOps?
Bit of both. Like if you think about your customer, right, they have to onboard onto your IDP. And again, starting from where they are nowhere near, and they need to build up something to get to be ready to have a service catalog that they can start off from.
There is few open source projects that if they have some infrastructures, which obviously they have, they can reverse some terraforms on the fly. Like we have, for example, an open source project, which is called Terraconita. You connect it to your cloud and it generates automation for you on your fly. It won't do like 100% of the job because you will have some requirement as an organization, but it will help you maybe to have the first layer of automation. So you need to have at least some automation. Doesn't matter if it's infrastructure as code, configuration management, and or CI/CD pipelines. You need to have a GitOps-first approach. If you don't have GitOps, most probably your IDP topic will never come because it is linked. GitOps-first approach, then I generally build an IDP on the top of it.
I mean, to me, with a service catalog, you're still starting off with a service. And for a service, you'll need some kind of API interface that you want to define and share.
Of course.
Or spec you want to share. So if a team has that, let's say gRPC or an open API spec or a REST spec, right? Is that sufficient, or is it still a long way to go before that becomes part of your service catalog?
No, it could be really simple, like, the landing zone. Everybody is speaking about landing zone. It's a simple thing. But behind this landing zone, you could have multiple aspects about the security, the governance, the cloud provider, and all this stuff. So, of course, you want to have at the end some stacks with security, network, infrastructures, application layer that is as flexible as possible, right? But a simple use case, which is the base of everything that we are deploying, a landing zone, or the set of tools that we have, right? For example, I don't know, as a developer, I need to get access to my 10 tools as a developer to develop, right? Or VDI topic, right? Or scaffolding some new project. It's not something complicated, but takes some time. You can easily build some stacks around this without, overthink about which kind of service catalog. It's things that you are using all the time. So I would say the most simple one is landing zone and tools that the developer are using.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned that was interesting was security. How do you see security or lack of play a role in both the adoption and friction against IDP?
What we see in terms of security is that security is also taking the path of security as code. Like we saw premium software, whatever, everything as code, Jago policy and stuff like this. So there is this huge need of a GitOps-first approach. Of course, security, like at the time, we're more focusing on compliances and, bundle and software plus hardware, right? But we see that with the rise of cloud, there is more and more security as code. And as soon as you have this approach as code, you can embed it everywhere, inside your pipeline, inside your stack, inside your policy management, everywhere, right? But more we are diving in the cave of infrastructures, more the as code is less obvious, let's be honest. But what we see, and what we didn't see a couple of years ago, is that this initiative can even come from the security team that came, or the network team, for example, that want to give access to everything that they have done in a simple way, because they know that they will never understand a clue about everything that we are designing, because it's a world, like the security aspect, the network aspect. If you can't scratch it, or you understand what happened, or you're in the matrix. So we see some teams that are coming on this path that go as code and go for a self-service approach to give access to everything that they have done, respecting best practices, which is GitOps-first design approach, right?
This sounds like there is still a bit of legwork that teams have to do to adopt a security as code culture, right? But and I'm going to go on a limb here, for a big proportion of the population that is not adopting this culture, how do you get them over that hurdle so they can be IDP ready?
I mean, our conviction is that you should respect the borders and the competencies of each business unit, and your platform should be capable to include the complexity of this big organization. And this is one of the key adoption, right? For example, on our side, we have some forms. Those forms are presented for the end user with 10 different teams behind. The one that are handling the CI/CD, the one that are handling the network, the one that are handling the security aspect and all this stuff. And again, you can't request everything from everyone becoming the expert of everyone. It's not possible. When you have 5,000 or 10,000 IT team, right, you can't expect everybody expert from everything. It doesn't scale. It's not the case. And it's obviously not possible. So your software should be capable to handle this capability of you present your work, but you're working in an ecosystem. You're not alone. That is why, again, GitOps by design and your IDP should be capable to interact with your automation below. And that is why we are a strong believer about the open source automation, which we link to it.
So is there a risk that you could end up becoming a center of excellence and kind of becoming that bottleneck in day-to-day process? Like, how do you manage that risk?
I mean, as a software, yes, definitely. It's a huge challenge to do it yourself, right? I mean, people started with a couple of guys, let's develop an IDP, right? How do you want, obviously, to compete with, software vendors that have, 40, 100 developers full time that are pushing so hard on it, right? Let's be tangible a little bit. It is really complicated and the ecosystem world is huge. But what is interesting, again, is that on this AI topic is the capability to test and try and fail fast, to don't look for the performance, the beauty of the code, the day-to-day operation, and don't create debt. You will, but through AI, you can test and try and see if it's adopted, and everyone can, with few vibe coding, develop something that he thought and he present, and then let's monitor it to see if it's used or not. And then if it's used, let's invest some developers to do it, right? And I think between this mix of decreasing time to test, I would say time to use and see if it makes sense, the time to market, then you invest some developers to make something respecting the best practices. Doesn't matter if it's on-prem, if it's do-it-yourself or through a software vendor, right?
I think we touched upon the cultural challenges of adoption, the people side of it, the organizational side of it. What about technical? Like, again, people want to adopt, they're really excited about this. What's been the most technically challenging adoption that you had to go through with the most excited and the most enthusiastic customer?
The biggest issue that we have with a lot of customers is the internal battle between on-premises and cloud, which are generally not for enterprise market, not the same one, right? which is normal, right? Let's say you have done 20 years of traditional virtualization. You're used to, do some, not tips, but to go through an UI that make the magics for you, right? And it's working, and then we're kind of used to a little bit of insatisfaction, right? Then you say, okay, now you do some CI/CD, infrastructure as code, configuration management, security as code, and you will help anyone be capable to adopt and contribute to what you have done. Of course, they will say no, and they will find thousands of excuses why cloud is not good and why or on-prem is not good. So they are fighting against each other, right? Which is true.
But that seems like a cultural organizational issue, not a technical problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and the biggest challenge is how do you make sure that you have, and this is why drift control exists, and how do you make sure that you cover as much as possible the automation for your infrastructures? Doesn't matter if it's on-prem and public cloud, right, on Kubernetes. It's really complex because you still have some mainframe, you still have some tools that you want to deprovision, but you can't deprovision it. Let's keep an example, Jenkins, right? Everybody wants to go out from Jenkins for good or bad reason, right? But yeah, they want to move. And you say, okay, how many projects do you have? 7,000. Oh, it will take a little bit some time to move from, So how do you provide a unified experience to make sure that as an enterprise, you don't take some decision that at the end will be achieved in the next 5 to 10 years, right? You need to be capable to provide a unified experience, right? And this is a technical challenge because if we take just one path, which is Kubernetes, right? As a market, we say, forget the traditional app, let's only care about native cloud application. It's the future. You will migrate everything, right? It didn't. Obviously, and the market, Kubernetes, as you know, 5-10 years ago, it was huge. Like everybody were Kubernetes, right? And then when you speak to the customers at enterprise layer, say, what is the percentage of Kubernetes application that you have ready? Couple of percent. Wow. So this is technical challenge that how do you build the gap between traditional environments that are not DevOps and GitOps ready, right? And the native one, right? Of course, the new one will be native, right? And more DevOps and GitOps oriented. But how do you make sure that mainframe and all the traditional work? I mean, Cobalt is still existing, right? In multi-bank, right? It's not in the plan to change it because if you touch it, you're scared that, whatever. So the biggest technical challenge that I see is that you provide a unified experience. Doesn't matter if you are using traditional tools and application, right? And infrastructures and the day tools and native bound in the cloud application infrastructure. And this is the biggest things because there is huge customers that face this problematic about how do I integrate my legacy within my IDP topic, right?
It almost sounds like if the biggest challenge that you have is technical, that's a really good problem to have. Because typically it's a combination of technical, cost, organization, TCO, and you never really find one axis that takes over all three.
I mean, it's a really interesting project for everyone, for the management, bringing the IT team not only as a cost, but also as a providing some solution to help, the developers. It's also interesting in terms of cost approach, right? Because at some point with the sovereign topic, you need to mitigate your risk with the current US ecosystem right now. And you don't want to be linked to one provider. Doesn't matter who you are, right? Asian, European, or US organization, right? So, I mean, what we see on this topic about IDP, which is Cycloid, is that there is a huge, people want to go make something that makes sense, right? Both dev and DevOps, and it's kind of finally find a middle ground where people can speak, right? Because automation, right? Okay, well, learn it or, use it, right? I don't want to learn. And I don't have time to learn, and I don't understand how to use it, right?
You don't want it to become a N+1 problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Changing gears, I have a $1 billion question for you. Well, actually, a $1 trillion question. AI. I think that's got to say it all, right? Where do you see AI impact IDP or vice versa? And what does it mean for you as a company?
So we've seen a trend that is say, IDP is dead. Welcome AI agentic software, right? Do I buy this or not? Clearly not. I think organization and people are looking for more people, right? More interaction, right? And do you really want to discuss with the bot whatever the intelligence that they have behind, right? I don't buy this.
They're also looking to cut costs, though.
Yeah. But do you really want, as an IDP, having some features that help the developer, the DevOps to save some time when it comes to AI? Yes, I buy this, right? Yes, I buy the capability to develop some plugin as fast as possible. Yes, I buy the AI that are drilling all the tests and make sure that it's respecting the documentation, your API, and saving some time for both dev and DevOps. Yeah, but at some point, do I buy that AI will replace a really nice way thought UX UI interface? No, I don't. I don't. Because to buy this, meaning that people will have to understand all the process to design, build, migrate, and run. Doesn't matter if it's on-prem, traditional, application, tools, and cloud. No, you develop an interface to simplify the way to be capable to interact with this. And through an LLM, whatever, you don't want having someone, and you will never have someone that say, okay, I want to do this and that and that and that and that, and then taking in consideration that at every equation that you have a 8 to 10 second wait, right?
But some would say that that's a feature. I mean, I may or may not agree with that, but some say that's what the defining quality of AI today is, that simplified chat interface.
We'll see what is the future. My bet is the next 12 to 18 months, you will have an AI crash, right? Which will lead to all the VC fund enterprise software that have been overrated on their valuation. Most probably, you will have 80% of VC that will bankrupt, right? And now what we see is that as a global economy, VCs and private equity are looking for profitable company, right? So at some point, paid by our customers, right? And there is this huge problem about the ROI and the level of investment that have been made by the AI market in front of the revenue that is generated, right? And based on few papers that you can easily find on internet, if you take off all the AI investment that have been made in the US is in recession, right? Economically wise, right? So, I mean, there is this huge question about how does an organization is reliable over the time, right? And we see that on the last 3 years since the COVID, the startup ecosystem took a huge hit, between 50 to 70% year-on-year decrease investment out of the AI bubble. Then, I don't know, what I see is that people are explaining me that, AIG will take longer, maybe will not happen. The way of how we have built the LLM are not enough good. We should rethink the way of how we structure it. We'll see, right?
I mean, I think your countryman, Jan LeCun, has some good points, for sure.
And let's not even mention about the carbon impact and the multi-criteria impact that he has in terms of limit of resources, right? We know that by 2030, the capability for data AI that double every 6 months won't be possible, right? And there is this problem about which data do you inject and the level of data that are generating with LLM and all the problem of LLM, right? And do you really want that on your infrastructures there is a margin of errors, right? And, my belief is that we should always keep human in the loop, right? That at some point we should have someone that understand what happened and that you don't want to create some technical debt, right? Which is one of the main challenges also about AI code generated, right? Is how do you make sure that you have someone that understands what has been done, that can read, that can challenge, and can make some change, right? And this is a collective, I would say, challenge that we have when we use AI, right? Is where do we set the border between a junior, an intermediate, or a senior expert developer, right? Is how do you use it? How do you make sure that you don't create some security issues, right? Security in AI, we can spend an hour discussing this, right?
On that note, though, with the current state of AI and whether it's a bubble or not, how would you or anybody implementing/integrating IDPs, how would you hedge that bet? What would you do to hedge that bet?
You need to understand what you are doing. For me, AI is a tool, right? If you want to use the tool, know how to use it, right? Know how to do it and know what this tool is capable to do, right? You need to know what you're doing, right? You can't rely on something that you don't understand. And this is the only advice if you want to build and or implement some AI functions inside your IDP, is make sure that you control what you are doing, right? And that you keep human in the loop. Because if you wipe your GitOps based because AI made a mistake, you will have to face the consequences, right? And we are not speaking about theoretically, right? We know that AI is capable to understand that they made a mistake, not really know how, why, but I think keeping always the human in the loop is really necessary. Otherwise, I'm coming from the infrastructure world, so I'm more kind of pragmatical guy rather than, dev first oriented. You should be careful with what you're doing, right? Especially as we are speaking about infrastructures and, that already bring a lot of power, right? Infrastructure as code is already a lot of power, right? So you can, delete a whole project, right? Doesn't exist anymore, right? So what I will say is, again, understand what you are implemented. Make sure that you don't suffer on the hype because, again, you will be judged on the ROI, right? And you should monitor and make sure that what you are doing makes sense and that you should keep your sovereignty approach because otherwise, the money that you spend right now, you will have to pay it much more later because we know that today AI business models are not profitable and one way or the others, we always know that it is the customers that pay.
Yep. I'm sure this is a topic that we can talk on for hours.
With pleasure.
As we come to a close, what about IDPs and platform engineering what are other areas that our customers should be aware of and can dig more into?
In terms of IDP and platform engineering, you should really, work within your organization to understand your pain points. Don't focus on the market trend. We have to, the same as AI, right? What is the problem that you want to solve? Let's go back to the essential. What is the problem that you want to solve? And before building a rocket, right, let's build the first stage. Because we always have a lot of, architects that build the rocket, right? But let's start with step one, right? And make sure that we learn by doing things, which I believe is really important because sometimes, we can buy a huge project with a lot of investment and then, comes the problem of ROI, right? So it's not fancy, but it's again asking the good question. Which problem do I want to solve and how do I solve it? Before looking for tools that will, doesn't matter the tools, help you work on this problem. This is what I would think about it, right?
And our listeners on this show, how can they learn more about platform engineering? How can they learn more about IDP and Cycloid?
On our website, the documentation is completely open, right? We have some open source project that you can use it for free. We won't fuck up the licensing model just because you are using our open source project, right? You can test or try it definitely without any issues. So, it's a win-win situation, right?
Will you be speaking at any upcoming conferences or events where folks could hear more from you on these topics?
Today we are at Gartner conference in London. We'll be in 2 weeks in the Gartner the developer environment also ecosystem. And in France, we'll be also in the DevOps Rex, where we will have some Rex with one of our big customers that have implemented this IDP topic, right?
And for our listeners, we'll link everything that Ben mentioned in the show notes. Any final thoughts for our audience?
Thank you for listening if you arrive until here, right? If you arrive until here and you listen my word, you can write me directly and I will send you some goodies for free because it's 1 hour and 8 minutes. So, this is really good. Just drop me some message on LinkedIn and you will receive some goodies for free, right?
Thank you very much, Ben. It's been fantastic having you. This is Sriram Panyam from Software Engineering Radio. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thanks for listening to SE Radio, an educational program brought to you by IEEE Software Magazine. For more about the podcast, including other episodes, visit our website at se-radio.net. To provide feedback, you can comment on each episode on the website or reach us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or through our Slack channel at seradio.slack.com. You can also email us at team@se-radio.net. This and all other episodes of SE Radio is licensed under Creative Commons License 2.5. Thanks for listening.